Hello again. I just thought I would resume reading from my novel entitled The book is called The Weight of Light, and I did the first chapter a couple of days ago, and so I'm just going to continue on. Present day. In a remote, inhospitable landscape, amid an arid, unprepossessing jumble of rocks halfway around the world, rough hands smashed a hole into a sealed burial chamber with more force than caution, prying open a space large enough to crawl through. Glancing around the cramped space with a flashlight, hoping to discover treasure from many centuries past, the thief was disappointed to find a simple pedestal affixed with a heavy stone tablet. It was carved with indecipherable figures and symbols that appeared to be like some sort of bizarre alphabet. Mouth twisted in disgust, a more thorough search was made of the tomb, yielding a few but respectable trinkets, possibly related to the tablet, although not likely worth the anticipated fortune. He sighed. Not exactly what had been hoped for, but not terrible for a day's work either. The fantastic tale last night after supper and a few too many drinks from the now dead, inebriated stranger had seemed boastful, even ridiculous, hinting at something that could be the most startling discovery of this age. A snort disturbed the ancient dust. The tomb was modest at best, but hopefully it may have at least been worth his trip out into the desert. His regret involved only loss of revenue, not the stranger's death. Walking back over to the stone slab, he shone the beam of light more closely on the top. Bright, untarnished metal that looked like it was likely real gold lit up the lines of the symbols, 96 in total if he had taken the time to count, with a few extras around each corner, set in a grid possibly made of poured blackened silver. Grunting with effort, he managed to turn it over. The exact signs were repeated, but in reverse. He tensed, hearing a faint noise. Glancing up, he scurried back to the opening he'd come in. Looking around, he saw nothing to explain the noise or his disquieting alarm. Ridiculously, it sounded like distant music of some kind. Instruments. In the middle of a desert. He snorted and shook his head at the thought. Lips pursed now, eyes narrowed. He was already calculating mentally on how best to unload his dubious discovery for the most cash. One never could tell what those strange collectors of odd bits of antiquity would be willing to pay for such a piece. It might be priceless, or worthless. His shrug was fatalistic. It would be what it would be. But first, to figure out what the thing was. He grunted, hefting his find toward the opening. The faint, haunting music still wafted in on the desert breeze. A shiver chased up his spine. There it was again. Eerie. Taunting. Promising. Chapter 2. And this is a quote from Genesis 6:1-6. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. Sorry, excuse me. This is 11/427 BCE. That's the time. The screaming ricocheted through Amoros's skull, endless, ceaseless, unrelenting, forcing him to his knees. His teeth clenched, and he ground his palms against his temples in a vain attempt to force the sound from his brain. Air wrung from his lungs. Great muscles bulging, eyes squeezed shut, he collapsed forward onto his elbows, fists clenching into his hair, rocking back and forth. A moan tore through his throat and caught on a ragged sob at the very end, a guttural sound like an animal in pain. the sound of desolation itself. Tears obscured his darkened vision, leaking unheeded onto the uncaring stone beneath him. The small, welcoming weight hanging on a thin length of chain, swinging gently from his neck, was both comfort and torture. A bright, shimmering circle, symbolizing eternity. Their eternity. Why did she do it? How could I have let this happen? Words, incomprehensible, came out as nothing more than a tormented groan, with no ready answers forthcoming. The life-giving, life-saving music was gone, dead. Only the endless, anguished screaming remained, ripping and tearing, cutting deep, echoing ravines into his soul. The jagged place in his chest clenched with visceral intensity that almost made him believe that his eternal existence was finally at an end. He would welcome it, should it come now. Eyes the color of mercury, their depths iridescent and changeable as quicksilver, again searched the empty spaces both within and without and came up wanting. A frozen loop of pointless questions he was powerless to interrupt, crushed anew with every compulsive revolution of thought. He let the merciless, discordant howling of the wind outside, the cold stone walls tear through him like the wailing spirits of the malcontent dead, consigning him to a wretched eternity of ravenous, licking flames in the furthest reaches of the inferno. Despair, stalking, ravenous, devouring. The litany in his head returned, intruding again. What broken creatures are we all, and just how long must we endure? Metal grating over rough stone scraped harshly across his ravished senses, and heavy footsteps approached his cell. He grimaced with pain but couldn't bother to rouse himself to open his eyes. The sound of a key finding a lock, then a loud click. Hinges protested as the door swung inward. Come. The barked summon rang out against the damp rock of the walls, the smoldering, sullen light of smoky torches that lined the endless, oppressive, age-darkened halls. Even though he knew all of what appeared here was no more than the dazzling fabrication of someone else's whim, with his own powers fettered here, he was still powerless to change it. Or even change his form back to spirit from the flesh he'd chosen. And he cared not at all. The illusions woven around him held no relevance within his dark, hellish consciousness beyond the simple fact that they restrained him. After a silent moment, the command came again, this time in a voice more moderated. Not unkindly, the voice said, "Come, Watcher, you have been called. It will not benefit you or yours to keep them waiting overlong." The guard appeared oblivious to the anguished shrieking causing the crushing agony in the Watcher's head. But then, only he could hear it. It was his greatest strength and his most profound weakness, and now, paradoxically, had become his worst nightmare. Although even nightmares were denied him, for in order to suffer nightmares, one must first be granted sleep. With visible effort, he rose and followed, staggering a step, then two, managing to lever himself to his full height. Dwarfing his guard, he squared his massive shoulders and strode forward, his jaw a sharp jut of resolve, sparing no glance for his escort. His clenched fists opened and closed again, bound by heavy metal manacles. The guard took a small step back before checking himself. Concentrating all his strength on containing the pain within, he furrowed his brow, placing one foot in front of the other with a measured tread, beginning the long march. An imposing figure, at nearly 7 feet tall, he towered over even most of his own kind. Black shoulder-length hair fell away from his savage face. Like all of the higher orders of celestials, it was a breathtaking, beautiful visage, even twisted as it was now in acute pain. Many of them maintained the bright golden countenance common among the higher celestial beings, although some, such as he, notwithstanding his unwavering allegiance to the light, also now embraced the more complex construct of shadow. His expression settled into a gritty, roiling well of defiance. Her sacrifice will not be in vain, he vowed, as he followed his jailer, nor forgotten, he swore silently. He found himself at last before the massive, ornately carved doorway to the cavernous audience chamber, and with effort altered his bearing to a more suitable demeanor, if not complete submissiveness. The restless, shimmering energy of the beings waiting inside filtered through the portal, the undercurrent of latent power, the music that was the fabric of the reality they all shared here. The hall of judgment. Life, death, imprisonment, punishment. His entire existence and those under him hung in the balance of this hearing with the heavenly ruling body. Lined up before the dais, they waited for him, his brothers. Heads bowed, their eyes carefully neutral. Known by many names, Watchers, the Grigori, the Irin, the Egregori, they were sentinels, ever vigilant, ever observing. They would be christened countless other titles, including those who are awake, ones who never sleep, and the eyes of the night, the soul's seers. He was keenly aware that as the chief of his group of 100 Watcher brothers, and regent among his race, that he would be judged harshly. Still, there was nothing he would have done differently, except, perhaps, ever permitting the master and his servants of even the remotest possibility of getting close to those that he loved. The resounding bell-like tones of the arch-seneschal's voice interrupted Amoros's painful remembrances, calling order and addressing the assembled celestials. He watched as Uriel, the pitiless flame of God, archangel of destruction, sat in stiff silence, looking down on the proceedings with an inscrutable gaze, only the very slight flare of his fine, perfect nostrils betraying his ire. Ire that, theoretically, he should not possess, befitting his impartial standing in the absent Almighty One's stead. There was an almost imperceptible, grim, feigned patience to his features that did not bode well for him, no matter the outcome today. Rows upon rows of other orders of celestials sat, reaching far into the furthest reaches of the chamber. The Archangel Michael stood on the other side of Uriel, arms crossed over his mighty white-clad chest, dispassionate eyes on the thousands assembled before him, not quite meeting his stare. Interesting. In that moment, his suspicions were confirmed. It was by design and not accident that where he had been placed to make his argument was many levels below where the council presided. All, including the members of his close brethren, waited, tense, anticipating for varying reasons for this hearing to begin. Hearing. Ha! What a jest, he thought. He was certainly not fool enough to believe that anything he said here would actually be heard. He knew now that this outcome had already been decided. Nor was he fool enough to think that this so-called hearing was only pertaining to the charges of interference with humans. And yet he had to try. It was crucial that he try, for her, for the whole of the human race. The arch-seneschal turned his piercing gaze upon him. Chief Watcher Amoros, you, and the Watchers you lead, have been summoned before this council to address allegations of your unsanctioned involvement with the race of mankind. These are the charges that have been brought against you, as well as the rest of your 200 brethren leaders that followed Semyaza in his ill-conceived revolt. From the beginning, your task was precise. It was to shepherd, nurture, serve, and to protect if necessary, but never, ever to interfere. However, instead of remaining detached, as was your duty, you have fallen far from our Almighty's divine plan, spreading seeds of debauchery, corruption, and dissension throughout the earth, teaching your human charges things far beyond what is permissible, forbidden things, gifting humans with knowledge of what they ought not to know, and thereby altering irrevocably the course of human history and its future. Sciences and arts such as tools of warfare, vehicles of air and earth, cultivation and uses of plants and herbs, writing, literacy, weather, the intricate workings of the constellations, signs of the suns and the moons, crystals, cosmetics, magics, and sorcery, all these were prohibited. And then, in addition to these violations, the lusting after and taking of women as mates from among the humans was never meant to occur. His accuser continued, gathering momentum. As you are doubtless aware, it defaces the very nature of divine order to have relations with humans in the manner that you are charged. This breach is not only strictly prohibited, it is an abomination. Shameful as it is to speak of, there are those that were once as we are, exalted beings of the light, that now have fallen low, choosing to follow the corrupt example of the rebellious Semyaza, and of you and your brothers, some of whom that have even now lost all reason and control, taking pleasure in the tormenting of innocents, preying on them without mercy. There are many reports of these disobedient ones hunting down humans for sport, using them for their own depraved pleasures and twisted atrocities. Flesh-eaters, debauched enslavements by the blood-drinking edemu, maiming, raping, and killing, of tampering with the perfection of both human and animal forms, mating strange, unlike beasts with each other, creating monsters never meant to be conceived in either mind nor body, breeding these horrific, ferocious hybrid beasts of air and earth and sea for no other reason than the idle amusements and lusts of power-drunk celestials, turning their will to dark imaginings. The thousands of surrounding celestials in attendance displayed varying degrees of confusion, distress, and outrage. Their response is a ripple of tinkling music that was discordant and disturbing, a wonder at this unthinkable transgression against their creators, the humans, and the perfection that they themselves embodied. Your brother and chief watcher, Samyaza, has already been brought before us with these same crimes, along with several others that have instigated this revolt alongside him as fellow chiefs, those who have led and perpetrated this gross aberration. The seneschal could not see that Armoros ground his teeth at the comparison to his so-called brother. The very suggestion that he was to be judged in the same category as Samyaza made him so furious that he could barely see, not to mention formulate his plea. With monumental effort, he refocused his attention on the proceedings before him. These heinous charges have subsequently been deliberated at length by this council. We have no alternative but to rule against you, unless, of course, you have new evidence for refute. He paused, affecting an attitude of bored forbearance, the expectant silence in the great hall deafening, his gaze fixed on the unwavering, steadfast form that stood in front of him. The collective assembly held the silence, even the pervasive vibration of the almost inaudible music muted. Armoros held his own silence, resolute, jaw locked, waiting. Chief Watcher Armoros, Bene Elohim, of the Iren race, leader to those egregori assembled here. He gestured formally to the silent group of his brothers off to the side. To these accusations brought before us, presented to you, headed by the celestial seraphim, Lariel, and Archangel Uriel, how plead you? The quiet stretched on for a breathless, interminable moment, becoming deafening in its emptiness. As tall and unyielding as the stone pillars set all around him, Armoros clenched his jaw. For a moment his clear, darkened eyes were bleak and haunted with unbidden recollections. The other celestials, those not accused, were tense with anticipation and wonder, small agitated sounds leaking from them in their strange alien-sounding tongue, chiming and tinkling, the purest of sounds. Humility warred fiercely with his fury. Humility won out with only the barest of margins. As ever, he was acutely aware of his duty and of what was required of him to mitigate this situation. The transgressions you accuse me of, he gritted out, of these I am guilty. The insistent wailing inside his head refused to cease. It was jarring and distracting, disorienting, the howling lament that no one else could hear. He shook his head slightly and fought for balance once again. Muted mutters and whispers flitted through the assembly, and Armoros caught glances and flashes of those distressed murmurings and painful chimings, among them on the periphery of his hearing. No matter. None of this mattered. Not anymore. A flare of triumph flashed through the arch-seneschal's eyes, swiftly extinguished by a mask of ennui. Very well, then. You are aware that these grievous wrongs cannot and will not go unpunished. Perhaps your own intentions might well have been more honorable than Samyaza and the others were, however, it matters not. The outcome and results have been as disruptive and unnatural as theirs. Any infraction by any of the Elohim now, however slight, must be addressed in swift and full measure. The ruling of this council shall be thus. Because you and your brethren have loved these humans more than you love divine law, you shall all be sentenced to an indefinite term of no less than 70 human generations of confinement to the valleys of earth, scattered, banished from the upper realms of heaven, until the day of the unlocking of the realms at the end of days, during which time you shall wander the earth alone, with no contact between you and the heavenly choir and the divine symphony. Yes, your task shall yet continue to be to watch over the human race as before, although now without the song to nourish you, or the seraphim and cherubim to call upon for aid. They will instead take on the role of enforcers to ensure your compliance. I will reiterate explicitly, you may not interfere or have carnal or any other kind of relations with any of your human charges henceforth. For now, we have decided that we will allow that you shall retain your individual gifts, such as they are, but at the slightest hint of any further infraction, you shall be hunted down, your gifts and talents shall be stripped, and you shall be made as vulnerable and mortal as the humans you watch. There was another startled buzz of muted, chiming conversation among those assembled before it subsided again, and before Uriel's upraised hand. The watcher's head, bowed until now, slowly came up. His bright, crystalline eyes, keen as the edge of his legendary blade, searched the small group of dazzlingly shining countenances in front of him. His jaw clenched in barely contained ire. If I may, what then of the mates that many of us have taken as wives? What of our children, the offspring of the Irene, of the Grigori? Are these ones also to be punished or put to death? The council's divine representative stared down at him with withering reproof. Your children, these Nephilim, are a scourge on the face of the earth. Worse, a terrible peril that endangers all life that dwells on the earth. Surely even you must see this for yourself. Every one of them must and will be destroyed. There is a purification forthcoming to purge these monsters and all evildoers from the earth entirely. He made no effort to disguise his distaste. As for the women that you have taken, their curse and fate will be to be driven from their people, shunned by their own kin. They and the others that have taken up the forbidden practices you and your watchers have taught them shall be outcasts, feared and persecuted by all. We shall take no direct action against them for now, as they shall be punished enough in due time by their own. His strict gaze brooked no argument. Armorose's gaze twisted into something dark and unreadable. He was aware that he should simply accept their edict and depart, should just turn around and walk away. But he found himself unable to do so. There was too much at stake for him to just leave. He had to try, for those who had no voice here. He knew that by challenging them, he may incur yet more displeasure and perhaps a more personal, harsher wrath. He cared not. An ironic laugh echoed in his head, skipping like a deranged maniac along the slippery edges of the incessant, bloody screaming. He had lived through worse than what these pompous fools could inflict upon him. Much worse. His temper just barely leashed, he dared to speak again, forcing a more moderate tone. There are, unfortunately, many of the children who are, as you speak, violent, cruel, and lawless, and for these the only possible answer for any kind of peace can be eradication. That much is not disputed. But there are also many who are gentle, gifted, and righteous souls, those who live and fight for the light, as are the majority of the women taken as mates. What, if any, provisions can be made for these, and all the other humans who are unequipped to fend off the attacks of these dark fallen angels who harry and hunt them now? Humbly I ask, would you have them all punished, tormented, killed? What higher purpose could that possibly serve? There was a massive swelling of celestial voices, hundreds of disapproving, chiming voices drowning out the rare few chords of assent. The strident command for order, which was nearly drowned out. If it were possible, the archseneschal's tone became even more severe. His luminous countenance was furious and pinched. He raised his voice to be heard over the dying din, enunciating every word with precision. Every single one of those monstrous abominations with their innate evil will be hunted down and eliminated, the head of the council spoke over top of the receding dissonance. The children of the Grigori, one and all, are a menace and therefore shall be wiped out from the face of the earth by our order with no mercy granted. And any that choose to defend or shelter them will likewise be slain alongside them. These women that you have taken, henceforth you shall guard them yourselves. We shall provide no protection for them. Their blood from the persecution from their own people will be on your hands should they be threatened, damaged, or killed. Watch over them with diligence if you so love them, and cause no more of this havoc if you wish to provide a favorable answer when you are summoned again at the completion of your sentence. Just as you will, the humans shall also render an accounting to our divine King and Queen for their own actions and that result of their own free will on the day of judgment at the end of days. The faithful, the obedient, those who remain steadfast in the face of such adversity will serve as proof against the dark, or those who fail shall receive their punishment then. Observing Armoros gathering breath to rally, the arch-seneschal smoothly cut him off. His voice dropped, carrying no further than their immediate vicinity, changing it to something darker, threaded with a whisper of malice. Do not seek appeal, reprieve, or recourse in any form. Already we have dealt with 2 of your less repentant brethren by having them bound and suspended by their feet above a vast pit, hidden away beneath the surface of the earth, their cries unheeded until their judgment arrives. Consider, their fate could well become your own. Armoros' vision flickered with the force of his rage. Then his tone swelled again to include the rest of the hall. This is the final judgment of this council. We shall countenance no more insubordination, nor entertain any repeal. The murmurs of the approval rippled through the chamber, louder than before. He raised his chin higher and looked down with supercilious distaste at Armoros. Your sentence shall now begin. You have our permission to depart. So dismissed, Armoros met the arch-seneschal's gaze for a long moment, menace and promises of his own burning through his tight expression before he turned and left the chamber, his head high, his mind already working to implement his plans of action to protect mates, children, and brethren. Those under his command followed behind him, and the others who had observed watched him leave, some jubilant, some silent, and a few softly chiming in empathy, and many muttering with satisfaction. A glittering pair of eyes, high above the amassed throng, followed the watchers being escorted from the hall, gloating. A humorous, malevolent laugh bubbled up, but died stillborn. Yes, another step complete. Watching and waiting. It was simple, really, to manipulate this here and that there, inserting his subtle seeds within the agendas of those many factions involved. He kept close tabs on others that nurtured their own covert agendas. He needed only to stay abreast of them, and with a little skill, play on each. The right word in the right ear, pulling a thread here and there. The heavens and its many realms had already changed in surprising ways never anticipated. He frowned, considering the complications of the unpredictable Nephilim, and with their celestial origins and heightened strength, senses, and abilities, how this could threaten his plans. He had made many promises to many factions, the majority of which he had little intention of fulfilling. All of his careful strategies, moving forward now in the heavens and on the earth, were concealed not only from the ignorant human race, but most of the heavenly occupants. The greatest risk still came from those watchers with their damned skill of soul-seeing and their volatile spawn, those who strove to uphold the great king and his whore, the queen of heaven. His nostrils flared with contempt. When he was finished, they would be no more, he thought with satisfaction. Few were aware that their precious song was in peril, that creation itself could be compromised, and that the symphony that kept them all alive could be silenced forever. War. Such a tiny word to describe worlds of possibilities. He savored the word. War was profitable indeed for those who had the aptitude to discern and seize opportunities, to position themselves in a way that brought them out on top. He turned, uttered a few terse words in an ancient tongue, and with a quick, negligent flick of his hand, sent his anxiously hovering underlings scurrying to do his bidding. A battered, defeated-looking group of looming, broad-shouldered figures gathered together on a hillside under a bleak, weeping sky. The somber landscape was a wet, unremitting mixture of grays and browns. An errant breeze fluttered the edges of dark, sodden cloaks and ruffled, misted hair, giving the fleeting impression of large, folded wings, but that was the only movement that betrayed the group as being more than a masterfully hewn being more than masterfully hewn stone sculptures. And yet, despite the profound air of loss that permeated the company, a whiff of danger wafted through, a quiet, dark whisper of an intense, ancient power woven about them, infusing their features, speaking of a perilous, ungoverned amorality, of a law they alone obeyed and enforced. Armoros reflected as he looked around the imposing circle. His brothers, those whom he trusted most. He'd be asking much of them. His quiet, carrying voice was thick with conviction, but the raw edge betrayed he was weary to the bone. Today has proven a very grim day in the history of our people. Once honorable before all, we have now been judged as little better than the Baal Elohim, who even now run amok, destroying the earth and its inhabitants. It pains me to admit that some of what has charged in the hall of judgment is true. Some of us have fallen short of our directives. We have lost sight of our duties. We have failed in our original mission, our most important mission, and that is the protection and nurturing of our human charges, and later our families. We have lost ourselves in the vast bounty and rich joy of the human experience, and lost sight of the reason we were sent here. And then, with the best of intentions, we added to our infractions by bestowing our knowledge, forbidden to humans, in a misguided and futile attempt to help restore balance and counteract the damage by attempting to arm the humans for defense against the dark monsters unleashed now on their world. I have had some time for deliberation, and I find myself in a difficult position, something I could not share today with the council. Should the outcome here be to go forward with this course, it will not only mean our total commitment, it may well mean our complete annihilation if we fail, both for us and for the humans we care for. He searched their faces, each one in turn. As far as I am aware, only a small group of us know that there is a subversive threat to the Divine Symphony. We know it exists, but not the instigator or its supporters. My proposition is this: that we shall, within the time frame of our sentence, seek out, nurture, and guide a small, carefully selected assemblage of humans and children that shall be our keepers of light. We, along with them, will guard and preserve the knowledge critical to the preservation of the earth and the human race, and ensure that these teachings are safeguarded for those surviving through until the end of days, when the gathered forces of light and dark will war for supremacy and for the song itself. At the end of our sentence, we will again be called before the council. It will be then that we will again present our case for forgiveness, hopefully after thwarting the ones who seek to destroy the symphony, when we have then proven our allegiance and loyalty beyond any doubt. The children of the Grigori, the Nephilim, those who share the love for the light, these will be the ones who will comprise the bulk of our keepers of light. They, with their strong, though somewhat unstable capabilities, lack only the same immortality as us, though certainly they are far more powerful and impervious to harm than their pure human kin. They must be guarded, their flesh and their souls, from the archangel's vengeance, and also from themselves, so that they do not turn aside from the light and into the dark. This may be our greatest challenge, for they have equal propensity for both good and evil, as do any of us, but because of their unusual mixed parentage, possess erratic qualities that must be carefully monitored and guided, so that they do not early on become corrupted and twisted in their purpose. We will need to be patient with the children and the rest of the human race, who have the unfortunate recurring curse of forgetting that which has come before. We must do everything within our power to prevent crucial knowledge from becoming entirely lost through the course of earthly time, the illusion in which we must participate. To this end, I believe it would be prudent for us to seed several key locations throughout the earth, in places that are or will be felt as sacred places, even to those who will have forgotten. These sacred places will serve to remind them of the truth, to trigger their divine memories and connections of what was, what their true purpose is, and what is to come. Our own greatest task during this long, arduous process is that we ourselves must find a way to stay single-minded and not be distracted by mundane things. We cannot allow ourselves to be drawn away, disheartened, or illusioned by anything that might occur over the many millennia. Make no mistake, The archangels, and especially Uriel, will be utterly relentless in their duty to police us and to hunt down and remove every last one of our children from the earth. They will be making no differentiations between the children who are violent, bloodthirsty monsters and the gentle children of the light. As powerful as the archangels are, they cannot know what only we are able to see, what is in their hearts. Only we can perceive the truth in their souls. And although I know all of you are aware, it bears mentioning again that the longer we must go without the life-sustaining music of the heavenly choir, the weaker we become. It is my hope that we can endure long enough to complete our mission here and not weaken from being too long away from our song. Armorose's eyes became fierce, distant. His voice cracked infinitesimally as he continued, just so that each of you are aware of just how invested I am in this. I have already sustained much in this conflict. I have recently lost my own heartmate to this war. I have a child still, hidden, somewhere safe. He swallowed around the aching knot in his throat and cast his bleak gaze to the sky. I hope. The persistent screaming in his head had diminished by only a slight degree, but he knew that it would never leave him. He closed his eyes. Nor should it. It was his personal, private inferno, his penance, and the very least he could endure for her, for the bleak, hollow, dark eternity that now awaited him without her. His sanity, his only defense against the gaping maw of the beast that waited for him in the darkness. Existing as a being of energy and spirit, and the vastness of immortality beyond time and space, here on a physical earthly plane would be excruciating. How would he ever survive it? Madness. He clutched hold of an inhalation that shuddered his massive frame. One breath at a time. One breath. In, out, again, and again. The humanness of the simple action reminded him of her and brought him comfort. The strain still sounded in his voice as his eyes opened again, as do a number of you. His gem-like eyes sharpened like the absent noonday sun caught on wet silver as he scanned his silent troops. The edge of steel returned to his voice. But I do know that I won't have my murdered heartmate's sacrifice be for naught. I am aware that this is more than a small risk, and I also know that not all of you may consent to this proposition. However, if this gamble is to succeed, it will be necessary to have as many of us as possible working together towards this goal. Immediately after this meeting, I will meet the other Grigori chiefs to see if they will also lend support to this cause. Are there any concerns? One of their number spoke up, respect and concern coloring his words in equal measure. I have no children and did not take a wife. Do you seek to enlist all of us in your private conflict? All of us risk the removal of our gifts and strength by only a few of us going against the council's decree. Armoros shook his head. Though I am your chief, in this I will not impose my will upon yours. Your decision will be your own. My request is only that you consider what I ask with thoroughness. There was murmuring, both for and against, the tension growing stronger as uncertainty filtered through the group. Hold, brothers. Samael, a pale-haired watcher with intense metallic green eyes, stepped forward. The characteristic deep well of crystalline translucency of the watcher's eyes shone bright in his glowing, handsome face, a contrast against the monochromatic backdrop. Peace. I ask you all to consider Armoros's words with care. He speaks with wisdom and foresight, and though each of you must speak your answer from your own heart, this will affect every one of us, regardless of the degree of past or future involvement or transgression. I myself also did not find a heartmate or father children. However, as we have been judged as one, I say we stand as one. There have been many ill-advised divisions before within the Irin, and we will each need to make a decision. In this conflict, if we are to survive, I believe we will need to, each one of us, stand beside the other. As it is now, we are all that we have, and if we are to exist as a race of warriors much longer, we would do well to unite for the good of our people and our human charges, if for no other reasons. Do not, even for a moment, forget who we are and where we come from. There were glances exchanged, nods, looks of resolve and pride from several, and still a few of uncertainty and perhaps even traces of bitterness. Samael turned and met Armoros's eyes, level and sure. He reached out his hand, steady as his voice. I stand before you, brother, he said, now and for the next 70 human generations. He smiled. And hopefully, El and Ashera willing, 70 more, and 70 yet beyond that. After that, who can say? Perhaps by then we'll find another ill-fated cause to champion. His irreverent grin evidenced his irrepressible humor. Another of the Grigori, Kabayal, stepped forward. Also deeply verdant-eyed, with dark, close-cropped hair, he carried a powerful presence and a lethal, jagged edge of danger. And why not, Armoros mused. That brother had his own veritable tidal wave of evil to stem. Silent still, Kabayal also nodded once in agreement, clasped palms with Armoros, his grim visage an obvious contrast to Samael's levity, but just as committed. Armoros accepted Cabe's approval with equal solemnity, and turned and grinned back at Samael, his first real smile in a long while. He spoke with quiet humbleness. Thank you. The tension abated. He turned again to face the others. If we are in accord to take this under consideration, we shall meet here again the day of the next solstice. Then each of you can present your own accounting to us all of your decision. Until then, remain ever vigilant. May you each carry peace in your heart. And you in yours, sounded the formal, long-standing exchange, deep, resonant voices spoken in unison through the ancient tongue and reiteration of their timeless commitment to each other. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that it brightened your day a little bit at least. Until then, take care.